Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of us here in the room and to those people online. I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. We're moving to the final session of today, and we're going to be building on Bill's keynote and the heads of agencies discussion to really get into what are these data and technology units doing, how are we collaborating with our colleagues, and what the impact is. I mentioned earlier that we published a paper yesterday that I wrote, and what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is take you at a high level through some of that paper, but you should still read it anyway. I'm going to be joined in 20 minutes or so by 6 very esteemed colleagues from 6 other agencies who are basically doing a role very similar to mine, and we'll be able to give you the real international perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about the technology-led transformation of competition and consumer agencies, focusing on the CMA. I use the term technology-led transformation. Why would I use perhaps a slightly convoluted term? The reason is there's a lot of discussion in the private sector in particular about digital transformation. So this is the use of a variety of different technologies to really try and make sure that the operations of firms are more efficient, or to build new tools and capabilities for organisation. And that's great. We absolutely do need that as agencies, but we need to be doing more as well. As you'll all be very well aware, and we've seen a lot today, that we're dealing with a lot of challenges in digital markets ourselves, and here's a few logos for things I'm going to talk about as I come further into the talk. And in order to deal effectively with these kind of issues, we need to make sure that we really understand technology and the underlying skills for digital transformation and for understanding challenges in markets. A lot of them are going to be very similar. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to try and cover 5 things. So a couple of slides on forming the data team. The real focus of the discussion is really going to be on casework, but I'm also going to have a couple of extra sessions on building technology and developing techniques before some final reflections. In terms of the unit, it started almost 5 years ago when the board decided to set up the data unit, as Andrea talked about earlier. I joined almost 4 years ago, and then we started getting the first data scientists and engineers in the beginning of 2019. And we started expanding that out into behavioural science and technology insight the following year. Through mostly organic growth, we've grown to almost 50 people. So it's still quite a lot smaller than our legal service or economics, as I think is fine, but we're actually a relatively significant size. I'm happier for my job that we're not too big. So what I'm going to do today is the 5 different roles that we play within the organisation. So the first is providing expert data and technology advice. There's a variety of different forms this can take, but when we're trying to look thematically, one thing we're finding across lots of our different cases that we're helping a lot in understanding firms' algorithms, and increasingly, and this is sort of almost more recent theme, we're really trying to make sure that we have to get our heads around privacy-enhancing technologies. Secondly, there's a lot we're doing around data acquisition and data science. So one might be in the context of bespoke requests for information to firms and dealing with very large data sets from firms. Another one might be, and we spent a lot of time on this, building our own scraping and monitoring capabilities. And thirdly, we're actually building data pipelines as well. We're then going to talk about data-driven tool development. So this is really us building our own software to enable a variety of different things. You've heard behavioural science actually a number of times already. So we're going to talk about behavioural science. And lastly, a whole variety of different kind of research type capabilities, from doing things that are more like academic research through to horizon scanning, and really trying to plug these into the pipeline of cases for the CMA. So to the first case example. So this is a consumer protection case on fake and misleading online reviews. And we started working on this right from the get-go, as the Americans say, from early 2019 when the first data scientists and engineers first came in. And the initial role we had was working with our consumer protection colleagues in a sort of integrated team. We were directly interfacing with Facebook and eBay, and they were making commitments on what they were going to be doing to reduce or really tried to completely remove the trading of fake and misleading online reviews on their platforms. And it turns out they're going to do that through algorithms, as you'd expect, and there were particular timelines that they were setting out for how they were going to be able to do things. And we really needed technology expertise in order to assess what they said they were going to do and the timelines in which they said they were going to be able to do it, and challenge when needed. We then moved into a sort of second phase, and there's a couple of different elements of this second phase. And we're really trying to focus on platforms that have online reviews on them and trying to look at what those platforms are doing to deal with this problem with fake and misleading online reviews. And one of the first things we had to determine was which platforms would we take forward for investigations. And we built a variety of different scraping capabilities, as I was just mentioning, and we then tried to assess how bad did we think the problems were in terms of fake and misleading online reviews. And we also, at the same time, really wanted to build up our own capability for understanding the various techniques available so that we could, in due course, make sure that we could assess firms' capability. So this picture here on the screen is actually from it's actually some real data. And in particular, we've got a firm in the center. This is the red dot. This firm was told to our consumer team, there was a complaint that they'd been using fake reviews. What we did thereafter that, we looked at all the green dots. The green dots are reviewers of this particular firm. And then the yellow dots are other firms that those reviewers have then gone on to look at. What you can see here is you can see a group of green dots. This is a group of individuals who have all been reviewing exactly the same firms. But we start to look into those firms, and we can see that one is a Korean antiques firm, one is a US asphalt firm, and other things that are completely non-related. And we see the same set of reviewers reviewing these globally different companies. Obviously, this is highly suspicious. Now, what's particularly interesting is my team actually didn't invent this particular technique for looking for fake reviews. In fact, the consumer team already did it, but they were doing it manually, recording things in an Excel spreadsheet. Hired a data engineer. Literally his first day on the job, he was able to create code that scraped things, and he was able to produce a first version of this chart off his own back on his first afternoon on the job. And of course, once you've got it in code, you can scale it 100 times, 1,000 times, 100,000 times if you need. And right now, we're working very closely with our consumer colleagues on this investigation, and we've had some significant data requests. We're also getting in a detailed way into the automated processing system, the algorithms of the firms. To move to another example, also from the relative early days of the data unit, is focusing on the digital advertising market study, which had a particular focus on Google and Facebook. So that's search advertising and display advertising, respectively. Within search advertising, we really wanted to understand the nature of Google's scale advantage in search. And we devised a particular piece of analysis where we went to Google and Bing. We got 1 week of all searches in the UK. Now, turns out searches have a lot of personal information in them. So to deal with privacy issues, we needed to hash the text so that we couldn't read it. But we use the same hash for the two firms so we can actually match and try and see whether they have the exact same searches or not. This is the results of what we found. So on the left-hand side of the chart, these are the most frequent searches on Google and Bing. As we move to the right-hand side, we get much less frequent searches, and these are the bottom 30% we label as tail queries. These are less frequent searches. And we can see the red line is the percentage of Google's exact search terms that Bing sees. And if we can move into that bottom 30%, we can see that Bing sees only 0.95% of the exact search terms for tail queries that Google sees. If we do the reverse, we look at what Google can see of Bing's tail queries, we can see that over 30% of the exact terms that Bing sees, Google is able to see. So using this metric, we can see that Google, in some ways, has a greater than 30 times data advantage compared to Bing. And obviously, we'd be concerned to the degree that this is related to the quality of search, and we think about how much Bing is able to compete. And this is obviously a very useful input for us thinking about what might be remedies within this particular market. it wasn't the only thing that we did as well. We also looked at tracking and privacy-enhancing technologies, which are crucially important and really building up technical understanding for the organization. And we looked at choice architecture and privacy and how these things were presented and trying to analytically look at whether there were any issues with consumers. And we found several. As we moved from the digital advertising market study, we discovered as an organization how Google was going to be, had said they were going to remove third-party cookies and introduce a whole series of new technologies under the term Privacy Sandbox in order to continue to allow targeting advertising and a variety of other services. So we launched an antitrust case, I believe it was January last year, and we have agreed a number, so technically the case has finished. We've agreed a number of commitments with Google for how they're going to introduce this new technology that deals with the concerns that Google might self-reference through these changes. But it turns out that the technologies that are being proposed, and we're now working very closely with Google and will continue to as they introduce these new technologies. But these technologies are fundamentally quite complicated. So, for example, in order to do targeting, there's two sets of technologies, both of which use machine learning in order to make sure they can target whilst it's still privacy preserving. We also need to be able to advertisers need to understand the return on their advertising. They need to be able to improve their advertising. So they need to get feedback on that advertising. Of course, a concern is if they got feedback, would that actually identify individuals? So there's a series of new technologies that allow for measurement and attribution whilst being privacy preserving. But lastly, there's a whole bunch of ways that firms, if they wanted to continue to track you, they could fingerprint you and continue to track you through the internet. So there's a whole series of additional technologies to prevent this fingerprinting, while still allowing a whole variety of things like dealing with fraud that you'd want to have happen. And these are fundamentally really quite technical issues, but actually incredibly important if we're going to try and evaluate the potential for Google self-referencing that we get under these technological issues. So we've got 3 members of my team. They're embedded within that case. And the fact that they're able to work on that case has really made sure that the case can run forward much more quickly, but also more rigorously as well. So for a relatively small amount of resource from my team, we can have a really large impact. Now, Mobile Ecosystems Market Study was published just last week. Within that, we've already heard discussion about valid or not valid arguments for the limits on platforms that might come from security. And that was one of our roles on the study, was to try and, working with external experts, try to make sure that the study team could really understand what were and what were not valid arguments. And we also, again, were dealing with quite a large amount of data. We had data on, for each individual app, data on a variety of different types of billings that the different firms had. And then we also had a lot of information on app discovery, so how people got to their apps as well, so we could really understand the nature of these markets. The behavioral scientists, we were able to step up a notch. So this is an example, it's actually an old example, of what you need to do on Android in order to cancel a subscription. And you might be able to see the details, or might not, but it's 7 clicks and it's really not obvious. This is just one example of many. It's really important to get into and analyze how choices are being presented to consumers. The Meta-Giphy merger. So this was another example where we deployed a really relatively small amount of resource. So one of our data scientists who had a background in the technology industry. And there was a particular theory of harm that was focused on what Facebook would be able to do if it had access to Giphy's data. And this data scientist with a lot of experience was able to get into the technicalities, the software development kit, the APIs, the various different types of data, and provide really good technical analysis that helped the team whilst being a very actually efficient use of his time. So again, we had really good impact with a small amount of resource. This is an example of us helping with specific data or technology-focused theories of harm. But we can also help in mergers when there's understanding tech markets more generally or products. So a good example would be cloud with the merger of Google and Looker, the merger of Salesforce and Tableau. We were really able to help the study team understand the nature of cloud markets. We also help with intellectual property remedies as well. So in the Tobii Smartbox case, these were providers of software for people with disabilities. One of the potential remedies was open sourcing the code, I believe from Tobii, if I've got that right. And we evaluated whether we thought that was a reasonable proposal or not. So case is just one thing that we do. We also really focus on building technology, and we're going to hear more from this from my colleague, the Director of Data Science Engineering and E-Discovery, David Doll, tomorrow. So I'll keep this brief. But the evidence submission portal was a very important piece of, it's actually both a data pipeline and a tool that we built. So we regularly have to take in many, many documents, especially for our mergers. This increased after Brexit, where we were having to act in much larger cases, and we were anticipating having to move up from maybe 1 to 200,000 documents to potentially having many millions. In fact, in the NVIDIA ARM case, we had 7 million documents we were dealing with. So we needed to be able to get these documents in much larger scale, but also be able to check they're in the right format, reject them if they're not, do a whole bunch of processing, have it ready to be put onto our the platform, the off-the-shelf platform that we use, Nuix. So this is what the evidence submission portal does. But moreover, because we've actually built the data pipeline ourselves, we can actually start building in our own data science capability as well, our own specific bespoke, and this is an example of one of these, this diagram is an example of one of these, our own bespoke machine learning specific for competition cases into the data pipeline to give new capabilities for our teams. On developing techniques, a big focus for us has been algorithms. And this goes a little bit beyond developing techniques. We really wanted to actually balance the conversation as well, because there was a very large focus on the potential of collusion, price collusion, but we thought there were many other forms of concerns with algorithms, so we really wanted to make sure that we as an organization could think very carefully around the variety of different cases and then make sure that we're prepared to take forward those cases. So these are a variety of different firms, providing some excellent services, all of which are using algorithms. I'm sure that all of us have interacted with algorithms through our phones, possibly even the dozens of times today. So this is what we're trying to do with that particular work, was really understand it. We're now getting into much more detail. So we're hoping to publish something before the end of the year that comes back to the different theories of harm that we identified previously and gets into more detail of what does it really mean to take forward cases involving algorithms. Another example, papers that we published 2 months ago, is online choice architecture. Relatively similar aims to the algorithm study is to lay out the territory of what we need to know about in terms of online choice architecture and think very carefully about how we can get more advanced in terms of using this capability within cases. In addition, we've actually been building up a different set of research type capabilities for horizon scanning and getting deep into understanding technologies that are coming forward. So we've developed a 4-stage process working closely with our colleagues in the digital markets unit. And once we've identified technologies we need to care about, we start, the second stage is actually to go a little bit deeper into these technologies and have a series of different outputs, one of which is these sort of technology primers that get into these technologies. So I mentioned 5 different roles earlier. Expert data and technology advice. I gave a series of examples of where we've been advising cases. Data acquisition and data science of various different types. And I've given an example of all of these as well. Tool development. I mentioned the evidence submission portal, but there's several other examples as well. And again, David will touch on this more tomorrow. Behavioral science, and lastly, as I was just discussing, it's our research horizon scanning capabilities, but also how we're trying to put that into the case pipeline. Some reflections. technologists within the context of competition and consumer protection agencies is is very much a new profession. And we work very much closely with lawyers, economists, and actually other disciplines that we have here at the CMA. But actually, there are a variety of different skill sets. Actually, Andrea mentioned this earlier: data science, data engineering, technology insight, behavioral science. These are people who haven't traditionally thought of themselves as competition professionals, though we're working on trying to change that. It is actually across the competition cases. Not every case that we get involved in is digital, but with at the moment we do find that the majority of our focus is on digital cases, and I think almost all of the examples, if not all of them, were digital. This can radically change how we approach the case. There can be completely new lines of investigation that we might go down because we have technologists involved. And there can be very, very high returns on investments. I gave the example of MetaGiffy, gave the example of the Google's Privacy Sandbox, where we can get a very high return on technologist time. In addition, it's not just about casework. There's a whole bunch of long-term investment that we can make that can really pay off in terms of technology or techniques. And this is a plea to other competition agencies on behalf of your technologists. Please allow them to be involved in building their platform. There's nothing technologists work that dislike more than a bad technology stack. Going forward, what I think we should do and what I would like to see is much more use of granular data. I find I learn so much more when we get on top of granular data, especially if we're able to put that together with careful causal identification techniques as well. In particular, I also think experiments are going to be really important. And this isn't necessarily just definitely for remedies, but maybe not only remedies. There's a lot that you can learn from experiments. Doing experiments, in my experience, is a very humbling experience because you almost never get what you expected in the first place. I also think that we need to see an integration of machine learning and also new data sources into how we build evidence for cases. And we're just starting on this path. Andrea touched on this as well, I've already mentioned. It's really trying to think about how do we mainstream this and create competition technologists as a profession. So, two potential game changers. We've started working on both of these. So the one is, as we build our monitoring capabilities through scraping, through data pipelines and other capabilities, how much can we as a set of agencies start to proactively identify where there's problems rather than necessarily having to wait for complaints or merger notifications or these kind of things? How can we move to being more proactive as opposed to less reactive? And I think there's real opportunities here. This is building on work actually the sectoral regulators have been doing for several years now. This is, if people don't know this image, this is from Minority Report. When they're trying to do, it's the Department of Pre-Crime. The second thing, which I think is really important, is we've already talked about, and this has come up a number of times, about collaboration. But from my data science and my data engineering teams, the majority of what they do, the outputs they do, the majority of that is represented in code. The marginal cost of copying code is very, very close to zero. To the extent that the different agencies are working on similar problems, and we are working on similar problems, we can really benefit from this. So these are different networks, right? And we can think about these are direct network effects if we can get working together, right? So if I can build a piece of code and my team can use it, fantastic. If I can build a piece of code and 6 other agencies can use it, even better still, and even better for me when they start building code and we can use it. So it's not just about sharing code, it's about co-developing code. And we need the capability to be able to do that, and I think that could be a real game changer. So final slide is the publication that was already mentioned. Please take a look. It builds on what I've just been talking about, and I'd like to now switch over to ask my colleagues from the other agencies to join us on the panel. Now, whilst we're doing that, I'll mention it'd be great to get your questions. We're going to try to rattle through things fairly quickly if we can, to allow quite a bit of time for questions. If you look on your name tag, I think online this will be fairly obvious how to ask questions. For those in the room, if you look at your name tag, you'll see on the back side, there's the actual website you need to go to, and there's also a QR code that you can scan that will take you there. So please do that. So I'll introduce my fellow panelists. So I'm going to introduce them in the order that they'll be speaking. So first is to Jane. So Jane is the General Manager of, if I'm going to use the Australian term, data and intelligence at the ACCC, the Australian agency. She's been working for about over 15 years in a variety of enforcement intelligence roles at the ACCC. Her background's law, economics, and political economy. And I'm going to mention this all because we've all got slightly different backgrounds. Next up is Yann. Yann is the head of the digital economy unit at the Autorité de la Concurrence. Apologies for my pronunciation. That's the French agency. And Yann is an economist by training. Next is Menno Israel. Menno's the chief data officer at the Dutch agency, the ACM, and apologies for that one, and has held this role since 2019. His background is in cognitive science / artificial intelligence, and he's been running data teams for some time now. Next is Stephanie Nguyen. She's the acting chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission in the US. So her background is in digital service, public policy, and sort of digital media theory and design. Next is Flavio Laina. He's was the head of the intelligence analysis, thank you, and forensic IT support unit in DG Comp in the Commission until the end of April this year. He's now moved on to state aid. His background is also economics, and he'll be talking about that unit. And last and by no means least is Leila Wright. She's the Associate Deputy Commissioner of the Digital Enforcement and Intelligence Branch at the Competition Bureau. And you've had a variety of positions at the Competition Bureau, and your background is actually law, I think, if that's correct. So what we're going to do for the panel, we're going to have 4 minutes for each panelist to talk a bit about their agencies and answer the topic question for this panel. And then we're going to have a few questions from me, and then hopefully quite a few questions from you. So without any further ado, over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Stefan. And thanks to you and the CMA team for the opportunity to be here today, and particularly to escape the Australian winter to this beautiful sunshine in London. I'll just quickly recap on our structure. Gina gave an outline earlier, but for those who weren't present for that panel, nearly 12 months ago now, the ACCC established its Data and Intelligence Branch, which I head up, and that brought together 4 existing units within the agency. Our contact centre, which we call our info centre, and that collects data from, it's actually more than 400,000 contacts to the agency each year now from the general public. Our intelligence analysts are also in the branch, along with our legal technologists who specialise in e-discovery and digital forensics, as well as our strategic data analysis unit, or SDAU, which is made up of a range of data analysts with varied backgrounds, including statistics, maths, computer science. We've even got an astronomist in the team, and data scientists. Our branch provides support for teams across the agency and is based in our sort of centralised advice division alongside our lawyers and economists. I'll just make 3 observations about the ways in which we're using these skills at the ACCC. Firstly, given the prevalence of digital platforms and the potential for them to impact in a harmful way on consumers and competition, like many other regulators, the ACCC has established a permanent digital platforms branch whose staff have become experts in the products and services of the digital platforms. And that's obviously an established model for competition and consumer regulators for their investigators and their inquiry staff to temporarily become experts in a whole range of different markets simply by spending a lot of time interrogating them, speaking to the various stakeholders, and engaging in a variety of methods to collect information about them. Something we've learned in relation to digital platforms in particular, though, but increasingly across the economy, is that it's very effective to complement those team members with technical experts whose data analysis and data science qualifications and training can assist us to even better interrogate and understand the platforms, their products and services. For example, by unpicking algorithms, by helping us to acquire and analyse large volumes of data, including through web scraping and then the application of AI and machine learning models or techniques. And our data scientists and statisticians, importantly, also have the requisite understanding of the potential risks around using such techniques. And I think that's really crucial to ensure that we're collecting and using that information in the most robust and defensible manner. The second observation I'll make is that and this touches on what Stefan was saying as well, while our analysts, data scientists and technologists tend to spend a large amount of their time on tactical work, that is contributing to particular cases or projects, more and more they're making a significant contribution to the way the agency actually functions, as well as its operational and strategic direction. So, for example, our SDAU, our Data Analysis Unit, is leading the development of our agency data strategy that sets out the work that we're doing to uplift our data capabilities across the full cohort of our teams, including through improved data fluency, better data management, testing and scaling new advanced analytics capabilities and machine learning, as well as working in partnership with our IT department to invest in the right projects and technology to support this as part of our agency's digital transformation program. We're also improving the agency's operational decision making, for example, by doing things like building resourcing dashboards that help the agency track where its employees are spending their time, and that in turn can contribute to decisions about selection and prioritisation of work. And we've been doing things also to draw together data from a range of sources to prepare intelligence reports and horizon scans that assist in setting our annual compliance and enforcement priorities. It is, I will note, a challenge, and I know that my fellow panellists also experience this in trying to balance that tactical work with that sort of future-looking work and capability building, particularly in an agency where your enforcement work is really the flagship piece of work that you do. And just lastly, I'll say that by bringing together our data specialists, our intelligence analysts and our legal technologists, and putting them with the team that collects our most valuable data, we've been able to find commonalities among these previously separate teams and combine their skill sets to solve different types of problems for the agency and to build new capabilities as well. So things like applying natural language processing to categorise the contacts that we're receiving through our info centre, which in time will assist us to do things like use chatbots to help consumers, building dashboards, again, for our info centre to help them with their reporting, and working with our legal technologists and data analysts to use new techniques to identify near duplicate documents, again, using natural language processing. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jane. Over to you, Yann.
So, thank you, Stefan. So I'm Yann Guthmann, head of the Digital Economy Unit from the Autorité de la Concurrence, the French competition authority. The unit was created in September 2020 based on the acknowledgement by the authority that it needed to strengthen its capabilities regarding digital matters. We have mainly 4 objectives. The first one is to develop new digital tools to help the case handler works. For example, we built a screening tool that we'll talk more in details on Friday. But also, simple tools can have a large impact. For example, we publish an interactive map on the website of the authority that pinpoint all the firms fined by the authority between 2009 and 2020. And so we had a lot of complaints from lawyers regarding this map. So it was very effective. Second objective is to help a case team regarding cases, mainly involving digital matters. And one data scientist can help very much regarding specific to illustrate with 2 quick examples regarding the AdlC framework that was already mentioned today. There was a complaint lodged at the authority with interim measures. And within 6 months, 2 case handlers assisted by data scientists were able to release an interim decision. So it's very quick for competition authority. And the case is still going on the merits. And another case is the Google News Corp, where Google entered in a transaction with the authority and was fined 200 million euros regarding kind of self-referencing in the ad tech sector. And in these very specific cases, the authority had to analyze more than 4 terabytes of data. So for your standard, Stefan, it's about 2 months of queries from Google and Bing in the UK. And it represented more than 200 million of results from actual bids. And so you can see that the help, like Stefan said, of data scientists can accelerate the work of traditional case handlers. We have also 2 more missions. The other one is to collaborate with other data scientists in France, but also abroad. And so you could say that being here is part of my missions. I'm very happy to be here. And we've been in touch with a lot of other data units from among authorities. And the last one is to collaborate with the academic world. We have currently 2 research projects. One is the DataCross 2 pan-European project that aims to detect collusions among public procurement using publicly available databases. And so we're among 17, I think, agencies, but not only competition authority, but also anti-corruption and so on. And the last one, it's a research project in collaboration with the Codex Stanford project. And we aim to publish an article at the end of the year, so stay tuned, we hope to publish. And so to conclude, I will say that during these almost 2 years, we've been very busy, but also very effective, like said Bill. And I think that we help the authority as a whole to be more effective.
Lovely, thanks, Yann. And over to you, Menno.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. So my name is Menno Israel. I'm a Chief Data Officer at the Authority for Consumer and Markets in the Netherlands. Data and the ACM. First, a little bit of thing about the ACM. So we have a competition department and a consumer protection department, but also one department is the energy market regulator, the post telecom transport regulator. So we have a lot of variety in data sets and in required analysis and in products we deliver. And we started in 2020 with the Data Hub, so that's where all the data scientists, data engineers are located. And we started with about 10 data scientists and data engineers, and now we're at about 20, and also expanding the capabilities and also our functions to more data management and data governance, which is also part of our role. What we do, what kind of things do we do? Well, first of all, we divided the capacity that the Data Hub has, like 20 FTE, through the middle. So 50% of our work is on casework for the different departments. And the other 50% is for a lot of other things, further capability building, but also for the more ACM broad projects. So the first 50% is really for different specific departments and casework in the departments. And so the other 50% is projects that benefit all of the departments. And that's one of the things that's was quite new, because you had these different departments with their own role, their own responsibility. And through mixing data or mixing products or building products for one department and then change it a little bit so the other departments can use it, you get a much more coherent coherency. So ACM broad projects, but also innovation and capability building. Some examples of the projects we run in the different departments are, for example, data analysis on mergers, using geographical analysis, for example, detecting dark patterns on commercial websites for our consumer department. And also collecting and analyzing customer complaints from the internet to get an idea which companies are doing the wrong things. Anonymity detection on transactions on the Dutch energy trading market. So that's for our energy regulator. And also for the behavioral part, finding behavioral constructs related to compliance and non-compliance for companies in corporate documents. So we use a lot of NLP for that. Then I have recruitment and retaining. So I will do this very fast. So we have, of course, it's a difficult market for finding the right data scientists and finding data scientists. We have one track, which is the normal ACM way of acquiring people for recruiting. But we also have founded a data traineeship. We do it now for 4 years with 2 other agencies, the Healthcare Authority and the Financial Market Authority. We normally also cooperate with them, and we started our own data traineeship. And that works quite well. So 6 people are hired every 2 years, and then they shift every 8 months, and at the end they choose an agency.
Brilliant. Thanks, Menno, and over to you, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, CMA, Stefan. I'm humbled to be here with all of you. Just a little bit of context on the United States. Back in the 2010s, during the Obama era, we saw a boom of the civic tech wave. This meant digital service technologies, technologists embedded into agencies, building and designing products and services for millions of people. A hat tip to the UK's government digital service, which we really drew inspiration from. I spent many years working and being with hundreds of low-income families who went broke because of predatory fees with student loan servicing. I've seen small businesses, many who are immigrant families, including my own, who struggled during a global pandemic because of restaurant fees and food delivery apps where pricing was really obscure. And fast forward to today, there are a growing number of these government digital services across government. But the question here is, instead of technologists building and designing products and services in government, how do we have technologists who are embedded into regulatory agencies, building and designing policies, working on casework, working on investigations? How do we ensure that these technologists and the regulatory agencies are connected to the communities, to the individuals, to the voices of people who we all are working toward? So this is kind of the focus of why I'm here and why our team is here at the agency. The strategy on a high level is to really focus on developing different tactics to focus on root causes of harm instead of whack-a-mole type harms that come up. Secondly, because the FTC has authorities across consumer protection, competition, and privacy, we need to think about a lot of these laws holistically instead of in separate silos. So that's something that's important for our team. In addition, this was mentioned earlier, but we are creating remedies and a toolkit for our case teams and attorneys that aren't one-size-fits-all solutions. So some of you may have heard our work with algorithmic disgorgement, which was on our Ever album case. And this is something where we need to actually have proportional remedies that attack the same level of harms that is in the conduct of the case. And finally, trying to craft CID questions, which are more in our requests for information, to ensure that we have the level of technical sophistication incorporated in the questions that we are really interrogating our companies. So today, our team focuses on 3 different areas. First and foremost, like many of my colleagues, working on cases and investigations. This includes developing investigational techniques. This includes participating in investigational hearings. Second is engaging in research and studies that strengthen our tech strategy. So this includes, again, our remedies and toolkits. Horizon scanning, of course, is really important to us, especially with a lot of the different emerging harms and verticals that many of you have already mentioned. And finally, serving as an expert resource in the agency when things come up. So this includes working with Congress on technical assistance. This includes collaborating and engaging with our international counterparts, all of you. So where we are now, you've heard a little bit about this from Chair Khan at our agency this morning, but we have increased the number of technologists on staff at our agency, and this includes AI researchers, user experience designers, software engineers, all types of technologists, and we plan to keep building up this team. We hope to see a future of Team CTO where we actually build more institutional grounding in our agency. And I'm incredibly grateful for all of the knowledge sharing from our existing technologists in OTech and our technology enforcement division, and to the inspiration that I draw from the ACCC, CMA, ICO, and everyone here today, who have really laid the groundwork for a lot of this work.
Lovely. Thanks, Stephanie. And over to you, Flavio.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you, Stefan, for the invitation. I think I was lucky that the invitation came a couple of weeks before I changed job. So here I am. I would like to take this topic from an organizational point of view. This intelligence analysis and forensic IT support was born in September 16 as a cartel unit. And it has a business objective. You've heard from Stefan, there are models of technology-driven digital transformations. There are also models of business-driven digital transformation. And we followed that. The objective was to enhance ex officio detection and prosecution of cartels. So the objective was clearly a business one. And to address this need, of course, the unit was equipped with tasks that are now consolidated in the new name, intelligence, analysis, and forensic IT support. One of these tasks is analysis, of course, and stemmed from the fact that we observed that companies were using technology not only to do cartels, but to hide them better. So it was clear that to fight at the same level, we needed to equip ourselves with the same technological abilities. But, and here comes the organizational aspect, we don't have individuals in the unit as service provider to operational units. It's the unit that has, with all these different skills and professional figures, produces a consolidated product on a certain topic. And this is why we have recruited specialized police forces in economic financial matters, intelligence analysts to find and analyze unknown information, because one thing is to analyze a data set that is in your possession. Of course, you may not know what is inside, but you have it, it's known. One thing is to find unknown information to build up a cartel case, for instance. So we have put these people into a single unit because we thought that a multidisciplinary element would be a winning move, in the sense that everybody coming with different backgrounds, different experience, would work on the same project with the intelligence analyst, the data analyst, the police officer, etc. And they would bring, of course, their skills, and they would learn from the others. Because if you think about it, when you have a line of code that may trigger anti-competitive responses, the code writer may not understand that it is anti-competitive, and the traditional enforcers may not understand this line of code. So you need to build a group, an osmosis, I would say, in which all these people will learn from each other. And that has allowed us to develop open source intelligence capabilities, exploiting, of course, big data sets to find patterns, auditing algorithms, and the complex IT structures of company to understand, for instance, how they can violate competition rules. So I think the model is, I often use this analogy in competition conferences. The model is a little bit of a car navigator. So the car navigator can be extremely sophisticated, can give you a lot of information, but at the end of the day, it's the driver who decides where to go, where the investigation is focusing, what is the result that the investigative team wants to achieve. And sometimes, and I look at the time, and sometimes when you know the area in which you are driving, it's better not to use the navigator. When you don't know in which waters you're swimming, of course, it's better to use the navigator. I would like to, from a managerial point of view, I would like to insist on a certain skepticism. And contrary to Stefan, we have debates on this. It's usual. As a manager, you have to understand what the machine will do better and what task an investigator will do better. So I think from a managerial point of view, this is one of the most difficult tasks, because clearly an investigator will know what the causality is, but the machine will may only see a correlation. So to make the move from one to the other, you need also the human element. There are tasks that are repetitive and abundant. Investigation may have a lot of data, but may not be repetitive. So maybe in certain investigation, the technology is very useful. In others, it is not. One field, and I will finish there, one field in which I see very promising result is certainly bid rigging detection. Because normally you have tender data. In certain competition authorities, you have direct access. In others, you have to ask them by law. Or you need a law that authorizes the competition authority to get access to this. But you can make analysis on hundreds and thousands of products or sectors and markets. And so here probably the future is moving away from screens to try to modelize the bid rigging conduct, like bid suppression, big rotation, and all these things. And I think I will stop there because my time.
Thanks, Flavio. And over to you, Leila.
Thanks so much, Stefan, and thank you so much to you and your team for having us here today and for this excellent conference that you've all organized. So I'll keep my remarks relatively short to give you a bit of context on the Canadian Competition Bureau's new digital enforcement and intelligence branch. About a year ago, the Competition Bureau received some additional funding from the federal government, and we decided as part of that new funding to establish a new branch at the Competition Bureau. So that new branch was established about 8 months ago. Until about 6 months ago, it was a team of one, being myself, and so we got some new team members, thankfully, about 6 months ago, and hired our first data scientist about 3 months ago. We are very much at the beginning of our journey in this area. But something that I think that we all have in common on this stage is that we're all working towards finding ways to move the needle as quickly as possible within our organization, in part because we want to prove the value and the use of the data analytics work within competition enforcement and promotion, and also because we all believe in that value, and that without it, we're really just going to fall further and further behind. And there's two aspects of the work that I find quite exciting. The first is just the spectrum of work that is possible when you speak about data analytics. So as Stefan said, my background is in law. I've spent my whole career doing competition law, first as a lawyer and then within the Competition Bureau doing enforcement and promotion work. And when you're doing enforcement work, generally, there's lots of different ways to bring a case. It generally takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, however you do it. And the difference that I find with this work, which I find very exciting, is that you can do work that takes an afternoon that really moves the needle for the organization. So if you're able to automate something within the course of 3 hours, you have saved the organization a significant amount of work, a significant amount of people hours. And then at the same time, there are a number of projects that are possible that take many more hours, many more months. So for example, the Canadian Competition Bureau this week will be launching what we call the collusion risk assessment tool. This is a tool that can be used by procurement agents to identify the risk of bid rigging in their procurement processes, and then also to provide them with information on how to reduce that risk. So this is a tool that's been developed by our data analytics team that has taken many months to do. And I find that real spectrum to be something quite exciting. The second area that I'll speak about is international cooperation. again, my experience in enforcement and promotion is that we certainly find lots of ways to engage internationally with our counterparts, but there are limits to that engagement, and the limits often have to do with differences in our laws, differences in our market structures. You don't see those types of limitations with this type of work. So Stefan spoke about the possibilities when it comes to code sharing. There's also a lot of discussions that we have just about establishing these types of new branches within competition authorities, how to identify quick wins for competition authorities, how to establish the IT infrastructure. And it's quite amazing that the challenges that I face are very similar to the challenges that others on this stage face. And it's great to have those opportunities to speak through those challenges and find solutions together. So I know that we're tight on time. I'll end there, but very excited to continue fostering the collaboration between all of our agencies.
Brilliant, thanks, Leila. So I can see we're going to finish on time at 6. So I've got a few questions for you all. We're going to actually try and go through that even more quickly if we try to keep to a minute or so as the answers, because we've actually had a few questions coming online, and I certainly actually have got some thoughts myself. I'll have one reflection before we go on that. So you talked about sometimes when data scientists can do a tiny piece of work, which is incredibly quick. We were looking at one particular case where it was a pre-case. We were determining whether to take a case forward or not. And the team really wanted a piece of pricing data. It was going to take them, they figured out, it was approximately 3 weeks to try and take the data. It was a bunch of PDF sheets and turn it into the data they needed. So one of my data scientists looked into the source code. He saw that there'd been a download button that had been disabled in the source code, flipped it around in about 5 minutes, had 3 weeks of data. The first question, and I'm going to start with you, Stephanie, is so how have you been working on integrating technologists into the agency?
I think it's 3 big things. First is trust and regular touch points with our bureau directors of competition and consumer protection. The second is some strong triage system to ensure that we are looking at and working on priority casework. And third is just being responsive. There are things that come up that we can't anticipate, and it's important that we really focus on building credibility and being able to chime in on cases that might have a technological component but may not be from a tech company proper. And so, I'll give a shout out to my colleague who was here, Alex Gaynor, if you could raise your hand. He is someone who will be called on all the time in our agency for any question related to security, and I welcome all of you to ask him questions about security if you have them too.
Brilliant, thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to have to try reducing the amount of time I've given people in advance, because that was great. So Yann, same question to you. How are you working on integrating technologists into your agency?
Yeah, so at the authority, we have a process of initial formation that all the new hires go through. And so it's a great way for new hires, especially data scientists, to learn about competition field and also to meet new colleagues. And another way to do a lot of team buildings is down raid. It's very, very effective, One data scientist with 10 other fellow colleagues in a hostile environment for 24 hours. It does wonder. And I kid you not, it works really well. So you should push your data scientists to do other activities like a normal case handler.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So on a slightly different tack, just trying to think about how technologists can start working with other professions. How do technologists, or more specifically data scientists, how can they best collaborate with case teams, and what recommendations do you have for other agencies who might be building similar kind of capability? So over to you, Jane.
Thanks. The answer is it depends a bit on the project. So sometimes we'll have somebody embedded in a project or a case team, and other times we'll act in more of a consultant role. The key, though, is to involve the technologists and data scientists early, and that is a real challenge, actually. Sometimes they're a bit of an afterthought. So my main recommendation is to set up systems and to support and encourage case teams to get in touch with the data scientists, the intel analysts, legal technologists as early as possible, create as little friction in doing that as you possibly can, create a variety of ways to contact your teams, including easy and visible formal request systems, also making it clear that you welcome informal requests, building and maintaining relationships, of course, potentially thinking about having relationship managers to deal with the different teams across the agency, proactively contacting teams where we can potentially add value, so going through board and committee papers to look for work that sounds like it could do with a bit of help in this regard. Being visible, we have a communication strategy in our branch which has a range of activities that are designed to try and engage teams and help them to understand what we do and how we can help them. But it's also equally important for our teams, and this follows from what Yann was saying, to understand the context of the rest of the agency, to understand what they're doing, what's important to them, what work is going to provide them with the most value, and what outputs or products can you give them that will be immediately helpful to them. And in that regard, going on a search warrant would be fantastic. I think just sitting next to them in the office and listening to what they're doing and talking to them is also a really important piece of advice.
Brilliant, thanks. So, Menno,
I totally agree with all the three of you. How we did this was having at first, the first 2 years, the data science, they still are, officially they are in the different departments, which creates a kind of ownership for that department and a good and strong connection. And from that connection, each department build up a team of data-savvy people, including a data manager, a project coordinator concerning data. And now we are more centralizing and using these mini-hubs in the different departments to connect to. We are basically part of that. And that gives us the opportunity to see all the relevant projects.
Lovely, thank you. So over to you next, Leila. So what do the next 5 years look like for digital investigations, and what are you going to be your priorities?
So we're living exciting times at the Canadian Competition Bureau right now. There was a package of amendments that were put forward in Parliament, and our minister has announced that he's interested in doing some broader consultations on amendments to the Competition Act. I always say that you could have the most amazing legislation in the world, but if you don't have an organization that's set up to succeed under that new legislation, you may not get the results that you're looking for. And so our priority over the next little while is really going to be supporting the organization as we move forward in the digital economy, finding ways to find harm as quickly as possible and remedy that harm in new and innovative ways. So,
Flavio, what are your priorities, and how are you going to move forward?
Well, you understand that I cannot commit my formal.
Please do.
I will share with you my vision of what may happen or will happen in the future. I think I'm going to say two very obvious things. One is that data will increase, and the second, that the technology will continue to evolve. But this is obvious, but it has repercussions on our work. And one repercussion is, of course, that all competition authorities will need to keep up with this change, and this will require probably recruiting even more specialists with a level of granularity smaller and smaller. So someone with something, and then putting all these people together. So from an organizational point of view, and I think Leila insisted several times on it, and I agree with that, we will have to combine not only the mastery of the technology, the ability to recruit people, but also operate in a legal framework in which our powers exist. So maybe at some point the powers will have to be changed. And the equilibrium will always be between powers, technology, and skills. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a few questions. I'm also going to put the panel on notice that I'm going to be asking for volunteers if they want to talk about any failures and what they've learned from failures, and I'm certainly prepared to talk about one as well, so they weren't prepped in advance for this. So there's a lot we can learn from failure, but I'm going to ask one of the questions that's come through online first. So, and you'll have to indicate who's interested in answering. So what have been the biggest organizational blockers in getting novel types of analysis into cases, and how do you overcome those organizational blockers? Is there anyone who wants to...
I'll just make a quick comment, which is I think that as an organisation, the ACCC prides itself on being evidence-based, but at the same time, our commissioners are very instinctive and they have a really good understanding of what's going on in markets because of all of the work they do and all of the engagement they have with stakeholders. As a result, it can actually sort of ironically be difficult to get them to look at data because they actually have a pretty good feel for things themselves already. So there is a bit of a cultural change there in terms of saying, this is what the data is telling us. We have to listen to the data.
Yeah. Anyone else want to fill that question?
Yes, I think you have to be very pedagogical because as every innovation triggers skepticism on one side or enthusiasm, it's magic, it works pushing a button. And a unit of this type has to clearly explain what they can do and, more importantly, what they cannot do.
Yeah, I'll actually run a non-chair thought. Offhand, so in terms of getting more focus into novel types of analysis, there isn't actually something we've done that much of. If you look at sort of what I presented, there wasn't too much that was sort of in some ways radically novel. That was one of the things I think that we could do more of. I think we could get more into big data. The way that we have done it, and this has worked pretty well, is working with the economists. So actually, they know our capabilities and they get quite involved in the design. But I think as we move forward, we're going to need technologists to get far more involved in actually the design of the analysis as well. How do you compete in the labour market for technology and data skills? In particular, how do you deal with the fact that we cannot pay as well as the private sector? So...
I can speak a little bit to that please. Because we're right in the depths of trying to hire data scientists, and this was a challenge that we knew going in would be something that we need to figure out how to handle. And we certainly can't pay the salaries of private firms. What I think sells people is the mandate, because competition issues are in the news very frequently, and there are a lot of people out there like us who just really want to work on this interesting work and do things for consumers that you're not able to do in private firms.
Here, I can agree. I knew that's what I was selling, but I was surprised how much people were willing to buy it. Yeah. Anyone else who'd like to tackle that question? Or should we go for you?
If I may add one other point we can sell is diversity, because usually when you're a data scientist in a private firm, usually have only one, maybe two, if you're lucky, data sets that you need to optimize. And when you're working for a competition authority, you have all the sectors available, all the data sets, and so it can be very appealing for people who want, also attracted by the public services.
Actually, quite a good question that was on my iPad for some reason has disappeared, but I'm going to try to. There is absolutely an asymmetry between us and the big digital platforms. Of course, there's going to be. How do we bridge that gap?
An information asymmetry, you said?
Or it's particularly technological as well. So they've got such fantastic data, such fantastic analytical capabilities. How do we bridge that gap?
Well, I don't think that we have to be better than them. We have a different angle, different point of view of what they're doing. If we know enough about what kind of data sets they have, if we ourselves know enough about data science, machine learning, and new technologies, and we are with clever people, we can predict a little bit what they are doing. We don't have to compete with them in that sense, I think.
I agree. I think, for our team, it's really a focus on looking at the actual market incentives in the remedies that we try to craft, instead of the more downstream sort of impacts where we need to figure out how are we going to actually monitor all these things when they come up. We will definitely not be able to find and hunt down every dark pattern that appears in apps across the entire economy. And so really focusing on how do we shift incentives, and what are those remedies for our case teams?
Yeah, we can conduct sector inquiries for the future regarding some specific markets. For example, at the French Competition Authority, we're currently conducting a sector inquiry on the cloud computing. And will become, I think, at the end of the year, expert in cloud competition, but don't ask me to set up your cloud environment for your organization. And what I wanted to say, it's easier to understand something that has already been built, but to build it from scratch, you know, but it's kind of obvious.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of advantages we have. So with our powers to request information, with our ability to speak to many, many different players, there's actually a lot of advantages that we have. And as we said, it's actually easier to get talent than you might think for us as well. So it's not to say that we won't be far behind, or not to say that we won't be behind, but we won't be as far behind as you might think, and that's been my experience. And I actually know many people who work in the tech industry, so I feel like I'm speaking from a point of information. Okay, so this will be the last question. How do you prepare for enforcement in new technological areas like the metaverse or the sort of the market leading edges that we're seeing in terms of new capabilities in AI?
So I think first you need to understand it, and that's something that has been difficult for competition agencies before they've had these types of teams in place, because it was up to the caseworkers whose expertise is in competition to learn these new areas of technology. So I think that once you understand it, you're able to have a more informed discussion with the competition experts on how that specific technology may be impacting competition and where to look in those markets to find harm as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go. I think one thing to look at is just history. You know, at one point, the radio, the automobile, the TV, there have been deceptive ads on all of these different new technologies. What can we use from our existing toolkits and laws to apply to these emerging technologies as we define them, whether it's AR, VR, cloud computing, and other things like that? Brilliant.
So does anyone have any pressing things to add? Otherwise, I'll wrap up for the day. So I hope you've enjoyed the first day of our conference. In fact, the first day of the CMA data conferences that will be going forward from here on in. I certainly know I really enjoyed the event and took a lot away from it. We're going to start tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. London time. So just like to invite those of us in the room and perhaps those back joining us virtually to thank everyone on the panel, and thank you very much.